On today's episode, we're going to be installing the Barrett ZERO-GAP 30mm ultra-high scope rings on the Model 82A1 50 caliber rifle. When installing Barrett ZERO-GAP rings on a standard M1913 rail, you will need the following tools: Barrett ZERO-GAP scope rings, a 65 inch-pound half-inch torque wrench, a T25 torque wrench for the 8 to 32 socket head cap screws that go in the scope ring caps. Next, we have a half-inch open-ended wrench for installing the cross bolts. We'll also need a bubble level to ensure that not only the rifle system is level, but also the scope. And we'll also need a 35 inch-pound torque wrench for the cap screws. When installing the Barrett ZERO-GAP scope rings on the 1913 rail, you want to ensure that the step cut of the clamp is bearing on the scope ring itself. When placing the rings on the rail, we are just going to finger tighten until we can establish the proper eye relief. That way it gives us some mobility if we need to move the unit. Once I've placed the rings on the rail, I'm going to check the levelness of the rifle system. This ensures that we're getting the scope as level to the rifle as possible. Next, we're going to take a standard rifle scope and place it in our Barrett ZERO-GAP scope rings. As you can see, the ring spacing is determined by the scope. You don't have as much room here in the front of this rifle scope, so you're kind of limited as to where the spacing takes place. For the rear scope, you kind of want to split the difference in the tube. Unless you're getting to the point where you're installing a bores on it, then the rings have to be a specific ring spacing apart. Next, I'm going to take the caps for our ZERO-GAP rings and place them on the scope itself. Now we have 4 8x32 T25 Torx screws that we're going to use to attach the caps to the rings. Barrett ZERO-GAP rings are designed kind of like a collet style gripping mechanism. To ensure the proper tightening, we first want to tighten the scope ring screws on the index side of the scope ring. Going back, we are now going to check to see that we have maintained our level and make any adjustments necessary. Once we're satisfied with the levelness of the scope, we will tighten down the gap side of the scope rings to 35 inch-pounds as well. And once again, once we've fully tightened down all the scope ring cap screws, we want to ensure that we are still maintaining our level. Once we've mounted a rifle scope in the Barrett ZERO-GAP scope rings, setting the proper eye relief can be accomplished simply by loosening the side nuts and moving the entire scope module. We will go into this further in the next episode. Before torquing the half-inch bolts on the Barrett ZERO-GAP scope rings, ensure that the scope is pushed forward in the slots on the 1913 rail